There's a kind of silence that only comes after betrayal. Not the peaceful kind, not the quiet you find at the end of a long day when the house settles and the world goes soft. This silence is different. It's the silence of a man who has spent 40 years in courtrooms, a man who has heard every lie, every excuse, every carefully constructed deception, and is now sitting at his own kitchen table, realizing that the greatest crime of his life has been happening right under his roof. My name is Richard Hamilton. I'm 72 years old. I'm a retired judge, and for the better part of 6 months, someone was slowly poisoning my wife. That someone was my son. I want you to sit with that for a moment. My son. The boy I taught to ride a bike in the driveway of our first house in Savannah. The young man I watched graduate from law school, chest swelling with a pride I didn't have words for. The person I would have walked through fire for without a second thought. I want you to know, if you've ever been betrayed by someone you love, this story is for you. But I also want you to know something else. I didn't scream. I didn't fall apart. I didn't pick up the phone and call the police in a panic. I waited. I watched. I gathered every piece of evidence with the same cold precision I'd used for 4 decades on the bench. And then I made my move. But that was just the beginning of my plan.
The autumn Margaret got sick started like any other. The leaves turned early that year, deep amber and rust, the kind of fall that makes you feel like life is still beautiful even when it isn't. We'd been married 47 years. 47. Most people don't get that long. Most people would give anything for it. Margaret had always been the stronger one between us. People found that surprising when they heard it. The judge's wife, the quiet woman with the reading glasses and the garden full of dahlias. But anyone who actually knew her understood. She had a spine made of something the rest of us weren't born with. She'd raised our son Daniel mostly alone during the years I was absorbed in my career, and she'd done it with grace and humor and a patience I still don't fully understand. So when she started getting tired, really tired, not just the ordinary tiredness of a woman in her late 60s, I noticed. Of course I noticed. I'd spent 40 years reading people. I knew what genuine exhaustion looked like. "I'm fine, Richard," she'd say, waving me off with a small smile. "Just getting older. We both are." But it wasn't just fatigue. After dinner, she'd get dizzy. Sometimes she'd have to hold on to the back of a chair just to steady herself. She'd lost weight she didn't have to lose. The color had slowly drained from her face, like paint washing off in the rain. Daniel and his wife Sarah had moved in 6 months earlier. They'd framed it as a kindness. "Dad, you two shouldn't be alone at your age," Daniel had said, and I remember thinking it was thoughtful, generous even. Sarah had a warm smile and an efficient manner. She'd worked for years in the insurance industry, she told us, and had a gift for organization. Within weeks, she had taken over the household grocery runs, the appointment scheduling, the small daily rhythms of our lives. And every single morning, without fail, Sarah made Margaret a green smoothie. "It's full of antioxidants," she'd say cheerfully, setting the tall glass in front of Margaret on the kitchen counter. "Great for energy. My mom swears by it." Margaret always drank it. She trusted Sarah. She trusted them both. I trusted them too, at first. I want to be honest with you about that, because I think it's important. I'm not a man who goes looking for darkness in the people he loves. I know my reputation, the tough judge, the man with the iron face in the courtroom. But at home, I was just a husband and a father. I wanted to believe the best of my son. I had always wanted that. The morning everything changed was a Tuesday in late October. I came downstairs earlier than usual. The kitchen was quiet, except for the hum of the blender, and Daniel was standing at the counter with his back to me. He didn't hear me come in, or if he did, he didn't know it was me. I watched him reach into the pocket of his shirt and withdraw a small amber-colored vial. He unscrewed the cap with practiced ease and let 3 drops fall into Margaret's smoothie. 3 drops. Then he replaced the cap, slipped the vial back into his pocket, picked up the glass, turned around, and smiled. "Morning, Dad," he said, easy, natural. "Mom still sleeping?" I looked at my son's face, the face I had looked at for 44 years.
I'll bring it up to her, let her sleep a little longer. He handed me the glass without hesitation, and the moment he left the kitchen, I poured it down the drain and replaced it with a fresh one I made myself. I didn't say a word, not yet, but something inside me, something ancient and precise, the part of me that had spent a lifetime in pursuit of truth, had gone completely, utterly still.
In a courtroom, you learn very quickly that emotion is your enemy. Not because emotion isn't real or valid, but because when you let it take the wheel, you make mistakes. You move too fast. You tip your hand. You let the person who hurt you know that they've gotten under your skin, and in doing so, you give them time to cover their tracks. I had not spent 4 decades on the bench to make that mistake now. The morning after I switched the smoothie, I called an old friend. Dr. Ellis Hargrove had been my personal physician for over 20 years, and more than that, he was a man I trusted absolutely. I asked him if he could arrange a blood panel for Margaret, a comprehensive one, without raising any alarm within the household. "Is everything all right, Richard?" he asked carefully. "I need you to trust me, Ellis," I said. "Run the full panel. Don't tell anyone what you're looking for." He called me 4 days later. I took the call in my car, parked 2 blocks from the house. "Richard," he paused, "there are trace amounts of a compound in her bloodstream, small enough that no routine test would have flagged it, but consistently present, which tells me it's been administered over a period of weeks, possibly months." I didn't speak for a long moment. "What kind of compound?" I asked. He told me. I wrote it down in the small notebook I always carry. My hand was steady. Years of practice. "If this had continued much longer," Ellis said quietly, "it could have caused organ failure. It would have looked natural, age-related." Natural, age-related. I sat in that car for 20 minutes after I hung up. I allowed myself exactly that long to feel what needed to be felt. The grief, the fury, the deep bone-level sorrow of a father who has to accept that his son is capable of this. 20 minutes. Then I put the notebook in my pocket and drove home. That evening, while Daniel and Sarah watched television in the living room, I went into the study to look for a pen. I have never been entirely sure whether it was accident or instinct that made me open the second drawer of the filing cabinet instead of the first. What I found there was a manila folder I didn't recognize. Inside was a life insurance policy. Margaret Hamilton, policyholder. $2.5 million, signed 18 months ago, before they'd even moved in, before her health had started to decline. The beneficiary was Daniel. I stood there in the quiet of my own study holding that document and felt something I haven't felt since the first time I sent a man to prison. Not anger, colder than anger, clarity. Sarah had worked in insurance. She would have known exactly how to set this up. She would have known the waiting periods, the exclusions, the way to structure a policy so that a quiet, gradual death would look like natural causes. She would have known all of it. I went back to the kitchen and refilled my coffee. I smiled at my daughter-in-law when she walked in for a glass of water. "You doing okay, Sarah?" I asked. "Great," she said with that easy smile. "Just tired. Long day." "Get some rest," I said warmly. That night, after Margaret had gone to sleep, I sat in my armchair in the dark and listened. The walls in our house were old, and voices carried. Daniel and Sarah's room was 2 doors down. I had placed a small digital recorder on the hall shelf 2 days earlier, tucked behind a stack of books. A retired judge still has a few resources, even after leaving the bench. I retrieved it at midnight. I sat in my armchair with my reading glasses on and played back 2 hours of audio. Most of it was nothing. Television, the sound of drawers opening and closing, a phone call from someone I didn't recognize. And then, at the 48-minute mark, I heard it. Sarah's voice, low and careful. "Just a little at a time. No one will notice." Daniel: "You sure? He's sharp, Sarah. He was a judge." Sarah: "He's 72. He's old. He's not in a courtroom anymore." A pause. Daniel: "How much longer?" Sarah: 3 more months, maybe 4. Then it looks natural."
If you've ever been betrayed by someone you love, you know that there's a specific, terrible moment when the last door of hope closes, when you can no longer find a way to explain away what you're hearing or seeing, when the truth stops being a possibility and becomes a certainty. That was my moment. I turned off the recorder. I sat in the dark for a long time, and then I began to plan in earnest. I have always believed that justice, to be true, must be methodical, not theatrical, not satisfying in the cheap, explosive way of movies and novels. Real justice is patient. It builds its case brick by brick, and when it arrives completely, with no room for appeal, no loose threads, no way out. I had 3 things: the blood test results from Ellis, the insurance policy, and the recording. I needed one more thing. For the next week, I said nothing out of the ordinary. I had breakfast with my family every morning. I made small talk. I watched Daniel pour drops into Margaret's smoothie when he thought I wasn't watching, and I switched the glasses without him knowing. Margaret's color was already beginning to return, though she didn't know why. She thought the new vitamins she'd started were helping. On the morning of the 8th day, I made a phone call to my former law clerk, now a detective with the county sheriff's office. I asked him to come to the house the following morning. I told him what I had. "Judge," he said slowly, "this is your son." "I know who it is," I said. "I'll have everything ready for you." That night at dinner, I was quieter than usual. Sarah noticed. She put her hand on my arm with what I can only describe as practiced warmth, the warmth of someone who has learned to perform it rather than feel it. "You okay, Richard?" she asked. "Just reflective," I said. "At my age, you start to think about legacies." She smiled and passed the breadbasket. The next morning came cold and bright, the way November mornings in Georgia sometimes do. I came downstairs early. I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table with the manila folder in front of me, the recorder beside it, and Ellis's medical report on top. I heard Sarah in the kitchen a few minutes later, the blender running. She brought the smoothie to the counter. And then I did something I hadn't planned to do. I changed course slightly. I set the 2 glasses side by side on the counter while Sarah's back was turned. When she turned around, I smiled. "Morning, Sarah. I made one for you too, blueberry, your favorite." She looked at the glasses for just a moment, just a half second, but I saw it, the flicker of calculation, the small pause of a person who knows something she shouldn't. She picked the wrong glass. I said nothing. 20 minutes later, she began to feel unwell. Nothing dangerous, I want to be very clear about that. I had not put anything in her glass. What she drank was a completely ordinary smoothie. But the mind is a powerful thing, and guilt has a way of making the body confess what the mouth won't. She sat down hard on the kitchen chair, pale and trembling. "I don't feel well," she said. Daniel came in from the hallway. He looked at her, then at me, then at the 2 glasses on the counter. I watched the understanding move across my son's face like a wave. I set down my coffee cup. I looked at my son, this man I had loved for 44 years, this stranger wearing his face, and I placed the manila folder on the table between us. "Sit down," I said quietly. Neither of them moved. I said, "Sit down." Daniel sat. I opened the folder. "The life insurance policy," I said, tapping it, "taken out in both your names with your mother as the insured 18 months ago." I moved to the next sheet. The blood panel. Trace compounds administered in small doses over an extended period, the kind of compounds that over time cause organ failure. I reached for the recorder, and this. I pressed play. Just a little at a time, no one will notice. Sarah made a sound I don't have a word for. Daniel's face had gone the color of old paper. I stopped the recording. I spent 40 years on the bench. I sent men to prison for less than this. I have always believed, I have always said that the truth, no matter how long it takes, finds its way into the light. The doorbell rang. I walked to the front door and let Detective Marcus Webb and his partner inside. "Everything's on the table," I told him. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you love, you know the strange, hollow feeling that comes when it's finally over. Not triumph, not satisfaction, just a vast, echoing quiet, like a room you've just carried all the furniture out of. I walked back into the kitchen. Sarah was crying. Daniel was staring at his hands. Margaret had come downstairs. She was standing in the doorway in her robe, holding the wall for support, looking at the scene in her kitchen with wide, bewildered eyes. She looked at me. I walked to her. I took her hand. "It's all right. You're going to be all right." In the weeks that followed, the case moved through the legal system with the grinding, impersonal efficiency of institutions that were built to handle exactly this kind of thing. Attempted murder, financial fraud, insurance conspiracy. The names of charges I had spent a career applying to strangers now belonged to my son. I testified, clearly, without hesitation, the same way I had expected every witness who appeared before me to testify. Daniel's attorney was good. He argued diminished responsibility, financial pressure, a moment of catastrophic poor judgment. He painted a portrait of a desperate man, not a calculating one. The jury didn't buy it. Neither did I. The sentencing came on a gray Thursday in February. I sat in the gallery with Margaret beside me, her hand in mine. I watched my son stand before a judge, a younger man, someone I had trained years ago, and hear the words that would define the next portion of his life. I felt Margaret's grip tighten. Afterward, in the parking lot, she leaned against the car and was quiet for a long time. "I keep trying to find the moment I missed," she said finally, "the moment I should have known. There wasn't one. That's what makes it so difficult. He was careful. They both were." "Do you hate him?" I thought about that, honestly, the way I had always tried to think about hard questions. "No," I said. "I grieve him. That's different." She nodded slowly. "I grieve him too." We drove home in silence, but it wasn't an empty silence. It was the kind that two people who have been through something terrible together can sit inside and still feel held. That evening, I sat in the study where I had found the insurance policy all those months ago, and I thought about what I wanted the rest of my life to look like. I had spent 40 years serving justice in a courthouse, but there was a different kind of service I hadn't considered, a quieter, closer kind, aimed not at the faceless machinery of the law, but at specific, vulnerable people who were being hurt in the same way Margaret had nearly been hurt. Elder financial abuse. I had read the statistics over the years and filed them away in some distant professional drawer. Now those statistics had a face, my wife's face. I made some calls. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you love, you know that the question you have to answer eventually isn't how could they do this? The question is, what do I do now with everything I've learned? The house we found in Beaufort was small by any reasonable measure. Nothing like the 5-bedroom home in Savannah where we'd raised a family and hosted 30 years of Thanksgiving dinners. But it sat at the edge of an inlet, and in the mornings you could hear the water moving through the marsh grass, and the light came through the kitchen windows in long golden strips that reminded me of something I couldn't quite name. Peace, I think. It reminded me of peace. We sold the Savannah house within a month. Margaret said she was glad to go. She said she'd expected to feel sadder about it, but walking out the front door for the last time, she'd mostly felt light, free. We established the Hamilton Foundation that spring. The formal name was the Margaret and Richard Hamilton Fund for Elder Financial Protection, but we just called it the Foundation. The seed money came from the sale of the house and from a portion of the life insurance policy, the same policy that had been meant to pay out on Margaret's death, which was voided and redirected, after a great deal of legal wrangling, to the nonprofit. Ellis connected us with a network of physicians and social workers who dealt with elder abuse cases. Marcus Webb, the detective who had answered my call that November morning, sat on our advisory board. Margaret trained as a certified counselor and began working directly with survivors, women and men who had been manipulated by the people closest to them, who sat across from her with the same bewildered eyes she'd had in that kitchen doorway. She was extraordinary at it. She always had been. I offered legal consultation and helped survivors understand their options, navigate the system, find representation. I had spent a career on the other side of that table. Now I sat beside people who needed someone to decode the machinery of justice for them, and I found a satisfaction in it I hadn't expected. Quieter than the courtroom, more personal, more real. There were hard days, of course, days when a letter arrived from Daniel's attorney, or when the anniversary of that Tuesday morning came around and I stood at a kitchen window remembering the amber vial and the easy smile and the coffee cup steady in my hand. Days when Margaret got quiet in a way that told me she was somewhere I couldn't follow. But there were also mornings on the inlet when the herons stood motionless in the shallow water and the sun came up slowly behind the pines, and I would sit on the small back porch with my coffee and feel something I hadn't felt in years. Gratitude. Strange as that sounds. Gratitude for the life that remained. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you love, you know that recovery isn't a straight line. It doubles back on itself. It has bad weeks after good months. It surprises you with grief when you least expect it, and with grace when you need it most. But it does move forward. It always moves forward, if you let it.
One evening in late July, about a year after we'd moved to Beaufort, Margaret and I sat on the back porch, watching the sun go down over the inlet. The sky was doing something extraordinary that night. Layers of orange and pink, and a deep burning gold at the horizon. The kind of sunset that makes you feel like the world is trying to tell you something. She had a glass of wine. I had my coffee. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Then Margaret said, quietly, "Do you think we'll ever be able to trust family again?" I looked at her, at the lines of her face that I knew better than any landscape I'd ever seen, at the gray in her hair and the steadiness in her eyes, and the small, hard-won smile she'd been wearing more and more in recent months. I thought about everything the word family had cost us, and everything it had given us back. "Family isn't blood," I said. "Family is the choice people make to protect each other, to show up when it's hard, to stay when it would be easier to go." She was quiet for a moment. "Ellis came by today," she said, "and Marcus called, and the Lees from next door brought over a pie because I mentioned I was craving one last week." She paused. "I think I understand what you mean." The sun finished its descent. The water went dark and silver. Somewhere across the marsh, a night bird called once and went quiet. We sat there for a long time. I had spent my entire career in pursuit of justice, and I had found it in the end, in my own kitchen, at a table with an envelope and a recorder, and the cold, steady hands of a man who refused to let the people he loved be taken from him without a fight. I did not regret any of it. I regretted that it had been necessary. I regretted the years I would not have with my son, the man he might have been in a different story. I regretted every moment Margaret had spent sick without knowing why. But I did not regret doing what I had done. I had protected my wife. I had served the truth. And in the aftermath, I had found a way to make it mean something beyond the two of us. That evening, sitting on that porch, listening to the water move through the grass, for the first time in a very long time, I felt free. For the first time, I felt free. Real family is the people who actually want you there. What would you have done?